Night had fallen over Allegheny County. The roads were quiet, the city dim and unbothered. But somewhere out there, a car was moving, and the camera inside was still rolling. She was just trying to finish her shift. One more ride. One more passenger. She had done this 100 times before. But this one felt different. Sometimes you don't realize you're in danger until it's far too late. Sometimes the signs are there, hidden in plain sight. Sometimes, the only witness left is the lens. She left behind 4 children, a fiancé, a family waiting at home, and a recording they almost missed. It wasn't random. It wasn't spontaneous. And it wasn't just one person who knew the truth. Before the story unfolds, you should know one thing. The answers were always there. Hiding. Waiting. Just behind the lens. Born in the heart of Pittsburgh, Christina Spicuzza's life began like so many others. Simple, full of love, and brimming with potential. She was the kind of person who could light up a room with her smile. The kind of person you could trust. Growing up in Pittsburgh, Christina was the daughter of hardworking parents who instilled in her a strong sense of responsibility. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and that was enough. Her mother, a homemaker, and her father, a mechanic, were the backbone of a family that shared everything, even their dreams. Christina's parents were both soft-spoken and humble, but there was one trait that ran deep in their family: love. Christina's younger brother, Jason, recalls their shared bond. We were tight-knit. Mom and Dad worked hard, but we always found time to be together. Christina always made sure we were there for each other, especially me. She was my protector. As she grew older, Christina was known for her positive outlook on life. Whether it was school, work, or her relationships, she always gave 110%. A natural leader, she was the one friends and family turned to for advice, for laughs, for encouragement. Her educational journey was steady, not focused on awards, but on creating real connections with the people around her. She wasn't the loudest in the room, but she had a way of making everyone feel like they mattered. In her early 20s, Christina met the love of her life, David Spicuzza. The two fell in love quickly, building a home and a family of their own. Together, they raised 4 beautiful children, each one the center of her world. She was everything to us, David says, his voice filled with quiet admiration. Christina had this energy that made life brighter. She wasn't just a mom. She was everything. Though her primary role was as a loving mother, Christina also balanced her job at a local retail store with part-time work as an Uber driver. It was a decision made out of necessity, to help support her family while giving her children everything they needed. She was determined, always looking for ways to make life better for them. Driving for Uber wasn't glamorous, but it was a way for Christina to make extra money. Safety was always a priority for her. She made sure to let someone know her route before every ride, always stayed aware of her surroundings, and kept a clear line of communication with her husband. She was careful always, David says. She would text me to let me know who she was picking up, where she was going. She did everything right. But no matter how many precautions she took, sometimes life doesn't follow the script. Sometimes, no matter how careful you are, the unthinkable happens. And that night, that ride would change everything. In a few short moments, Christina's ordinary night would turn into an extraordinary tragedy. But before it did, she left behind a legacy: a mother, a wife, a daughter, a sister, a friend. And in her final moments, she made sure the world would know she was a person. She mattered. Calvin Crew's story begins not in the headlines, but in a home that was, on the surface, just like any other. A family that, like so many others, faced its own set of challenges. But beneath the surface of everyday life, there were signs of trouble. Signs that, over time, would grow darker. Calvin grew up in Pittsburgh, raised by his mother, a woman who worked tirelessly to provide for her family. His father, who was largely absent, left Calvin with an early sense of abandonment. While he may have craved structure and stability, those things were hard to come by. The home was often chaotic, and love, though present, was sometimes overshadowed by a lack of emotional consistency. By the time he was in school, Calvin was already exhibiting signs of restlessness. He struggled to connect with others, his relationships with peers often marked by tension. Teachers would later describe him as a student who could be charming one moment, distant the next. A pattern of instability had already begun. Though Calvin was not known to be overtly violent, those who knew him began to notice troubling patterns. His family, strained by constant moving and financial pressure, couldn't always offer the support he needed. And his friends, although loyal, recognized that something deeper was at play. Friends recall a duality in Calvin's personality, an exterior that was calm, sometimes even friendly, but beneath it, something was brewing. He could be the life of the party, but there was always a subtle unease when he spoke. Like someone who could flip a switch without warning. One of Calvin's closest friends, Marcus, would later explain. He was never violent, but he had this dark side, like you could feel it simmering under the surface. He could switch moods in an instant. It wasn't a temper exactly, it was like a storm waiting to happen. Over the years, Calvin's troubled patterns began to impact his future. He had trouble maintaining steady work, drifting from one job to the next. His relationships with those closest to him were strained, often marked by emotional highs and lows. At times, he showed signs of remorse, but it was clear to many that he was trapped in a cycle that seemed impossible to break. Calvin's family, although supportive, could only do so much. His mother, who had always hoped for a better future for him, couldn't help but notice the growing distance between them. His father, though now out of the picture, had left Calvin with more questions than answers. Without a stable support system, Calvin struggled with feelings of rejection and abandonment. Despite all of this, Calvin still managed to form connections, albeit brief ones. In his late 20s, he found himself in and out of relationships, his life marked by transient moments of stability followed by deep lows. He was never a monster in the eyes of those who knew him, but there was something about him that made people uneasy. In the community, he was seen as a quiet, unpredictable man, the kind of person many would pass by without thinking twice. He wasn't a troublemaker, but there was always an underlying tension around him. And yet, in the most unexpected way, Calvin Crew would cross a line that would forever change his life, and someone else's. He was a man who, to many, seemed harmless. But sometimes the darkness inside isn't revealed until it's far too late. Calvin Crew's life was tangled in a web of relationships, each one pulling him in a different direction. One of the most pivotal of these relationships was with his girlfriend, Tasha. Their connection seemed ordinary at first, but like so much of Calvin's life, it was anything but. They met a few months before the tragic events, an encounter sparked by chance, two souls both searching for something. Tasha, a woman who had lived through her own set of challenges, was drawn to Calvin's quieter nature. She didn't know much about his past, but she felt his charm, his softness that could suddenly shift into something darker. Still, like so many others before her, she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Tasha, for all her warmth, couldn't see the cracks that ran through Calvin's life. And for her part, Calvin was equally unaware of how deeply his choices would affect her. Their relationship, while seemingly unremarkable, played a key role in the days leading up to that fateful night. One key detail would later come to light. Calvin didn't use his own phone that night. Instead, he used Tasha's, a seemingly small detail but one that would unravel much of the story. It was a crucial piece in a puzzle that had long been set in motion. As the night unfolded, it was clear that Christina Spicuzza's ordinary routine was destined to collide with Calvin's chaotic influences. A mother of four, Christina had a well-established routine, a family-centered rhythm that brought her a sense of purpose and stability. Every evening, she worked diligently, balancing family time and her part-time job driving for Uber. It was a steady, predictable life, one that didn't have room for the unpredictable forces at play. But that particular night, there was something different in the air. Christina's husband, David, was at home with their children, working on a small project in the living room, while Christina was out driving for Uber. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Christina was just another mom trying to provide for her family, her life moving along like clockwork. She had no idea that the evening would take a dark turn. In the midst of it all, Calvin's world had already started to unravel. His relationship with Tasha was just one thread in a much larger web of instability. Tasha, unaware of what was about to transpire, felt a connection to Calvin, a bond that, in hindsight, would come to symbolize the dangerous allure of his charm and unpredictability. For Christina, that night fit perfectly into her routine. She had made countless rides before, each one ordinary in its own right. She'd pick up a passenger, drop them off, and move on to the next one. Simple but reliable. But behind the scenes, Calvin and Tasha's lives were twisting in ways Christina could not yet see. It was a collision of two very different worlds. Christina's steady family life and Calvin's unpredictable existence, a life teetering on the edge. In the moments before Christina accepted the ride request, her life was unchanged. But the world she had known, the world of routine, of safety, was about to shatter. And the connection to her death? It began with one simple yet telling choice. Calvin didn't use his own phone. He used Tasha's. Why would he need to use her phone? What does this seemingly small detail reveal? As the night moves forward, answers to these questions will start to emerge, one thread at a time. February 10, 2022. An ordinary day for most, but for Christina Spicuzza, this day would mark the beginning of a nightmare. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Christina's routine continued as planned, a mother working a part-time job trying to make ends meet. Little did she know, a choice she made that evening would lead to one of the darkest moments of her life. Christina's shift began as any other. The hum of her car, the familiar streets, the rhythm of life that felt predictable. As a part-time Uber driver, she followed a pattern she had grown accustomed to: pick up a passenger, drop them off, and return home to her family. She'd been on the road for hours, moving through familiar neighborhoods, the comforting sound of her children's voices still echoing in her mind. Meanwhile, Calvin Cruz's evening took an entirely different turn. He was already drifting through the shadows of his own troubled life. The calm demeanor he'd shown earlier with Tasha was now gone, replaced with a sense of unease. Calvin had just left a string of failures behind him, but tonight he had a different agenda. His night was about to take a drastic turn, one that would intertwine with Christina's fate. As fate would have it, their paths crossed in the digital ether, a simple Uber request. Christina unknowingly accepted the ride. Calvin, unknowingly, was about to make a choice that would forever alter both their lives. Christina accepted the ride request, the sound of the ding marking the moment their lives collided. It was a simple gesture, a daily decision made by thousands of Uber drivers across the world. But to Christina it was just another passenger. Another ride to complete. As she drove to the pickup point, the tension in the air thickened, though Christina had no idea. For her, this ride was no different from any other. But for Calvin, this moment was the beginning of something he could not turn back from. The door opened and Calvin slid into the back seat. Christina greeted him with a polite hello, as she did with every passenger. They exchanged pleasantries, but there was something in the air that Christina couldn't name, an undercurrent of discomfort, a feeling she couldn't shake. At first the ride was calm. There was no sign of the terror that would unfold in the next few minutes. Just the low hum of the car engine, the occasional exchange of words. But what Christina couldn't have known was that beneath the surface of this ordinary ride, there was hidden tension. Calvin was about to make a decision that would haunt both of them for the rest of their lives. Then the words left Christina's mouth, words that would become haunting echoes in the days that followed. "I have a family, please." She had no idea that these words, words of vulnerability, would be the last she would ever speak. What seemed like an ordinary ride was now on a path that Christina couldn't control. The camera kept rolling, but nothing could prepare her for what was about to happen next. The days and moments that followed were etched into the dashcam footage, a silent witness to the horror that unfolded in the stillness of the night. What started as an ordinary ride ended with an unimaginable tragedy. And in the darkness, one question remained: why? As the hours passed and night turned to morning, the world around Christina's family began to change. The ordinary had twisted into the unimaginable. She wasn't home, she wasn't responding, and the silence spoke louder than any words. Christina's family, already familiar with her routines, felt the first whispers of concern. At first, it was thought to be an ordinary delay, perhaps traffic, maybe a longer ride than expected. But when hours passed with no word, the realization set in. Something wasn't right. The police were notified, and immediately a search began. Christina's phone went silent, her last known location was traced back to a dimly lit street, and the journey, the one that seemed so ordinary, now became a puzzle that law enforcement had to piece together. The search intensified. With each passing hour, the anxiety of her family grew. The calm suburban streets were now lined with officers, search dogs, and volunteers. The place where Christina had disappeared seemed to grow more remote by the minute. The hope that she would be found safe began to fade. As the investigation continued, the unthinkable happened. A discovery in a wooded area, an area that would forever change everything. In the thick brush, away from the roads and familiar places, a body was found. It was her. Christina Spicuzza. The body was found under heartbreaking circumstances, the worst fears of her family confirmed. She had been left in the woods, an innocently ordinary woman, now a victim in an unthinkable tragedy. The body's discovery marked a dark turning point, from the search for a missing woman to the confirmation of a crime. The police quickly turned their focus to the investigation, piecing together evidence, clues, and witness statements. But the question remained: who was responsible? As news spread, the public's response was swift. Media outlets picked up the story, headlines flashing across screens: "A mother found dead, an investigation begins." The city, the state, the world, all wondered how such a thing could happen. Christina's death was not just a loss for her family, it was a shockwave that spread through the community. Yet even as the public responded with shock and sympathy, the investigation continued behind the scenes. The police were no longer just searching for a missing woman, they were now searching for a killer. In the coming days, the details of the case would begin to unfold, revealing a chilling truth that no one could have imagined. In the midst of the confusion and grief, one thing became clear: technology would play a pivotal role in uncovering the truth. As the police delved deeper into the investigation, the very devices we rely on daily would help unravel the chilling mystery of Christina's death. It began with the dashcam footage, the last piece of Christina's journey captured in real time. The audio was sparse, a calm voice and ordinary exchange, but it held the first clues that would eventually tie everything together. Christina's words, her voice betraying the first sign of unease: "I have a family, please." The sound of fear in her voice, barely audible through the ambient noise, raised questions. What had happened during that brief ride? Who was she speaking to? And why did the calmness of the moment quickly shift? But dashcam footage alone wouldn't be enough to reveal the full picture. Investigators turned to another powerful tool: cell phone data. By triangulating Christina's last known positions, they began to map her final movements. Every ping, every signal painted a clearer picture of where she had been, and, crucially, where she had met her fate. The cell phone data pointed to an undeniable connection between Christina and her killer. But it wasn't just the signal, it was the connection to someone else. Someone who had been lurking in the shadows: Calvin Crew. His phone had pinged at the same locations, his movements aligning with hers at critical moments. But Crew wasn't alone in this. His girlfriend's involvement, though indirect, would soon become crucial. Through phone data and text message traces, investigators uncovered key communications, silent witnesses to a tragedy that had been set in motion. What had started as a routine Uber ride had spiraled into something much darker. Technology had laid the path. The pieces were falling into place, but there was still one more crucial step: the arrest. The arrest was carried out without incident. Calvin Crew was taken into custody, and the truth, as painful as it was, began to unravel. A man once unknown to the public, now the focal point of a community's grief and a family's loss. The technology, the cameras, the phones, the data, had done what no one could have predicted. It had revealed the unthinkable and had given voice to a tragedy that might have otherwise gone unheard. The wheels of justice began to turn. As the legal proceedings moved forward, the timeline of charges filed against Calvin Crew grew clear. The details were harrowing, but Christina's family remained steadfast, determined to honor her legacy and secure justice in the courtroom. As the case went to trial, the emotional toll on Christina's family became painfully evident. Her parents, siblings, and close friends gathered to testify, their voices trembling but firm. Their words, filled with grief and loss, painted the picture of a woman whose life was taken far too soon, leaving behind 4 children and a community devastated by the act. Each testimony brought tears. But the family's grace stood firm. They spoke not only for Christina but for the hope that her children, her legacy, would be protected from further harm. The room fell silent as they shared how her life had touched everyone around her. Christina wasn't just a victim, she was a mother, a daughter, a friend. But as the trial progressed, Calvin Crew's defense took shape. His legal team argued that his troubled background, coupled with his mental health challenges, had led him down a path of poor decision-making. His history, marked by difficult phases and troubled patterns, was presented in an attempt to explain, if not justify, his actions. But the prosecution was unwavering. No amount of background could erase the reality of what had been done. Christina's family, strong in their resolve, maintained that nothing would bring her back, and their desire for justice would not be swayed by arguments of a troubled past. The turning point came when the family made a decision that stunned many. They chose not to seek the death penalty but instead requested a life sentence for Calvin Crew. In their words, it was a reflection of Christina's values: love for her children, for life, and for the idea of redemption over revenge. It was a final act of grace that would define the legacy of this tragedy. The verdict came down with the weight of the world behind it. Multiple charges, including murder, and a sentence of life without parole. But there was one more twist that no one saw coming. Calvin Crew, surprisingly, was not present for his sentencing. The absence was noted, but in some ways it spoke volumes. Calvin Crew, who had stolen so much from so many, had chosen to be absent from the one moment when justice was finally rendered. It was a final act of defiance, a refusal to face the consequences of his actions. In the end, Christina's family chose to honor her memory, not with anger but with grace, a grace that would carry them forward, even in the wake of such unimaginable loss. And while Calvin Crew faced the consequences of his actions, the road to healing for those he left behind would take much longer. As the trial came to an end, the reverberations of Christina Spicuzza's story reached far beyond the courtroom. It stirred conversations, sparked debates, and led to actions aimed at preventing another tragedy like hers. The public reaction was swift, and the rideshare industry, once seen as a beacon of convenience, suddenly found itself under a microscope. The safety of passengers, especially those riding alone, became a central focus in the aftermath. In the wake of Christina's death, there was a growing demand for accountability. The question lingered: how could something like this happen in an industry built on trust? In response, the rideshare industry was forced to confront its vulnerabilities. Changes were made. Enhanced safety features were introduced across platforms, features that allowed riders to share their routes with family, track their driver's identity in real time, and provide direct access to emergency services with the push of a button. But it was clear, no feature could ever replace the loss of a life. Christina Spicuzza's death, however, was not in vain. Her passing ignited a fire for change within the community. Tributes poured in from all corners, online petitions were signed by thousands, moments of silence were held, and memorials sprang up in places where she had lived and worked. The community refused to let her memory fade into the background. They would not allow her death to be just another statistic. Her children and husband, though shattered by the loss, continue their journey, each day a reminder of the strength Christina instilled in them. They are not alone in their grief, as the community surrounding them has rallied, offering support and love. But their journey is ongoing, a quiet testament to the woman they loved and lost. The lessons learned from Christina's case extend far beyond the legal proceedings. They echo in every rider's safety check, every interaction between driver and passenger, and in the unwavering determination of a family to carry on. Christina's legacy lives on not only through her children and loved ones but through the changes that have been made in her name. Her life was cut short, but the impact of her story is far-reaching. In the end, Christina's story isn't just one of loss, it's one of courage, change, and the unyielding drive to ensure that no other life is stolen in such a senseless manner. Her death is not in vain. It is a reminder that in every moment we must strive to do better, be it in our daily choices or in how we care for one another. Christina Spicuzza's story is one of heartbreak, a mother's life cut short by a stranger, a tragedy that should never have happened. It's a reminder of the fragility of trust and the importance of safety in our everyday lives. A ride that started like any other ended in the most unimaginable way, leaving her family to grapple with a loss that no one should ever have to bear. But as we close this chapter, we must ask ourselves, what does trust mean today? What does safety really look like? Are we doing enough to ensure that those who help us in our daily lives, drivers, caretakers, or even strangers we encounter, are held to the highest standards of responsibility? This story is not just Christina's story. It's a story for all of us. A reminder to stay vigilant, to trust wisely, and to demand better from the systems we rely on every day. It's a call to action to make sure that no other family has to endure such a senseless loss. If you believe in the importance of rideshare safety and the lessons learned from Christina's story, please take a moment to like this video. Share it with others to help spread the message of safety. Leave a comment below. Tell us your thoughts on how we can make ridesharing safer for everyone. Have you had a memorable or important experience related to rideshare safety? We want to hear from you. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue to bring you respectful, in-depth storytelling about real-life stories that matter. By subscribing, you join a community committed to learning, reflecting, and ensuring that the lessons we learn here are never forgotten. Christina's story has touched our hearts, but it doesn't end here. Your voice, your actions can make a difference. Thank you for taking the time to reflect with us. Until next time.